Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, October 17th through Sunday, October 23rd, 2022. This week, the sun will still be in Libra for most of the week, but we will have the sun actually move into Scorpio at the end of the week, and on the same day, Venus will also move into Scorpio. So this means that we're about to enter a new level and things will begin to intensify very soon. This is not only just because of Sun and Venus moving into Scorpio, it's also because we're about to enter eclipse season. The Sun will technically be within range of the node, close enough that if we did have a new or full moon this week, it would be an eclipse basically. Now we don't have a new or full moon this week. We do have a third quarter moon in Cancer this week. That will be intense though, so you can pay attention to that. But no technical eclipses this week, but we are about to enter eclipse season, and we do have an eclipse next week. And for those of you who aren't familiar, eclipse season, well, astrologers call it eclipse season just because there's two times of the year every year, about every 6 months or so, where there is maybe a month or so where we get a couple new moons and usually a couple full moons that are considered eclipses. And this happens when the sun and the moon are close to the nodal axis, okay? And eclipse season, it's a time where everything changes. There's a lot of dramatic changes, karmic events happening. And my definition of karmic events is sort of just events that change the direction of things, so life-changing events. This will be especially true if you have personal planets in Scorpio or Taurus, because that's where the nodal axis is currently. Also, Leo and Aquarius as well, because the eclipses will square your personal planets if you have planets there. But for all of us in general too, we can all experience some kind of crazy activity. It's sort of like a new moon or a full moon on acid, so to speak, or intensified. And new and full moons are already pretty intense, so that's kind of what we're about to step into. And I find it very interesting that this is happening in the Scorpio Taurus axis right now. Like I said, we're about to enter Scorpio season, so this is already an intense time anyway. Scorpio is a very emotional sign. I almost forgot to say happy birthday, Scorpios. This is your time to shine. Scorpio is a notoriously intense sign. It's probably the most emotionally intense sign. So when you add eclipse season to Scorpio, all of this says, very intense things happening. And so I would say look to where Scorpio falls in your chart, because that's where there's going to be some major changes going on. Is Scorpio your first house? Then that means you are going to be the one changing. You're going to be initiating a lot of change. Is Scorpio at the top of your chart? That means this is going to be a very public time for you. Maybe a time of a lot of activity at your place of work or in public, etc. Is this in your house of relationships? Is it in your home house of, fourth house? Whatever, and if you want help kind of seeing how these things affect you, you can always email me at manic.mercurian@gmail.com. All of that information is in the description, not only of this video, but every video I post as well. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the day-by-day forecast here. So starting out Monday, October 17th, we start out with kind of a bang this week. Now, it's not an eclipse. I already talked about how we're about to enter some intense times. It's not quite that intense at the beginning of the week, but we do have that third quarter moon that's really kind of riling us up and provoking us to initiate change. Third quarter moons are philosophical in nature, but they're also very action-oriented. They typically represent crises in consciousness. And, this crisis, it's just provoking us to make change, basically. So yes, that is uncomfortable, but it has to be. Otherwise, if everything was always comfortable, we would never change anything. So this is it's just a time to make change. It's not a super big deal. I would say it's more intense than maybe the average day, but not necessarily life-changing unless you happen to have a lot of really important personal planets in your chart around 24 degrees Libra or Cancer. Okay. I did want to mention too that because the moon is in Cancer for this third quarter moon, and because we are kind of at the edge of eclipse season, these things do intensify the third quarter moon as well. And third quarter moons are already a little bit kind of, intense and action oriented. We feel riled up. We feel energetic. We can be stressed, frustrated, irritable, but also inspired to make change. I always say, these things don't have to be negative as long as if we're asserting ourselves and changing something, initiating something, exerting our energy somehow. That's how quarter moons are best utilized. So this is true for this one. It's just gonna be kind of intense, considering that the moon is in domicile in Cancer. I also talked to my last forecast about how this third quarter moon can make us a little bit sensitive because Sun is in Libra, Moon is in Cancer. Both of these signs are a little bit sensitive in nature, but they are very different because the Sun in Libra is representing an energy that's very detached and observant. Moon in Cancer is much more subjective and heartfelt and emotional. So combining both of these, it can make us very sensitive, but it can also make us more self-aware because we have both the deep feeling of the Cancer moon as well as the detachedness to observe and analyze that deep feeling from the Libra sun. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to continue on though. We also have one aspect happening on Monday, and this one too is really like, I don't know, sparking us to kind of energizing us, I guess I could say. That would be Sun trining Mars. I believe Mars it's still kind of sleepy. It's still going through this whole retrograde cycle in Gemini. So that's why typically, why I guess the Sun travels faster than Mars. So that does make sense. Sun would be initiating the trine to Mars. Anyway, but what that means, trines are easy, harmonious aspects. And making this trine between the Sun and Mars, it basically means, Sun is the energy that we embody on a day by day level. It's kind of how we experience the world, in public and kind of like our daily lives. And Mars is this very action oriented energy, kind of masculine energy, very ambitious. So having this trine, it kind of channels this little bit of a belligerent Mars energy. It channels that into our daily experience for Monday. So I actually like this a lot. When we factor in not only the third quarter moon, but also this trine between the Sun and Mars, all of this is showing that Monday is going to be a very action oriented day. So, again, we all might be a little bit restless, a little bit irritable, but on the plus side, this is a great day to start something, and it's kind of perfect for a Monday as well. Because this trine happens in air signs, Sun is in Libra, Mars is in Gemini, these are both air signs. This means that this dynamic is kind of social in nature. It can also be focused on information. So we may be a little bit competitive or domineering with one another. We may be especially very interested in other people, as well as information and learning something new. Tuesday, October 18th. I don't know why I paused for so long between the days. I'm going to try to work on that. Anyway, Tuesday, October 18th. I'm actually really excited for this aspect that happens on Tuesday. But before I go into that, we do have the moon leaving Cancer already and entering Leo. And this is really great too. This is going to feel so much more natural and kind of calm because, like I said, that third quarter moon on Monday it was really riling us up. It was, I don't know how to explain it. It was, we had so much energy kind of bubbling up. We didn't know what to do with ourselves, and that's where I always say we had to make some kind of change or take action. Tuesday's very different. Moon enters Leo. Yes, Leo is an energetic, action-oriented sign, but now the dynamic is very different because Sun is in Libra, Moon is in Leo. These signs sextile one another, so they blend together much more easily than Libra and Cancer do. Libra and Cancer kind of butt heads a little bit, but Libra and Leo, they blend very beautifully. This is also very beautiful for social dynamics, for conversations and cooperation, um, for multiple reasons today. One is because of Sun and Libra, Moon and Leo. We're mixing the diplomacy and empathy of Libra Sun and the polished mannerisms of Libra Sun. Also, want to make a quick shout out. Venus is pretty much conjunct the Sun. It's only 1 degree away. So this all says we're maybe being extra pleasant, extra nice, extra polished and sophisticated. So all that is great for social dynamics. But then also Moon and Leo shows some fire and some warmth, some charisma, a little bit of like pleasure seeking, a little bit of hedonism, and what else? And then that like fiery self expression as well. So combining Libra and Leo is really great for parties or just great conversations. Combining these energies is really great for all of that. And as if that weren't enough, we do have Venus trining Mars today. So Venus at 24 degrees Libra, trining Mars at 24 degrees Gemini. Um, you could almost say Sun and Venus are pretty much conjunct on Monday and Tuesday, and then they both trine Mars, just not right at the same time. Anyway, so what that means, this is the aspect I was so excited for. Venus trining Mars is maybe the most fun aspect, definitely a crowd pleaser. The reason being is because Venus and Mars are sort of like counterparts of one another. You can see, Venus is it's like the female symbol, and then Mars is the male symbol, and that's not a coincidence. Both of these planets represent desire and attraction and pleasure, just in very different ways. Venus is more of like the feminine side of all that, and then Mars is more like the masculine side. So Mars ends up being much more sexual and competitive. Venus ends up being more about just desire and romance and just pleasure. It's Mars is much more energetic, and Venus is a little bit more passive in nature. But when we combine these, when these two energies have this connection and conversation, especially in a trine like this creates a day that's really great for like flirtation or pleasure, desire, romance, sexual kinds of stuff going on. I think especially because this aspect is happening in air signs. Air signs are already so focused on people and wanting that interaction. And then when we have these planets that are focused on desire, making this trine there, it's going to be a really great day to have, some really fun interactions with people. Maybe sexual or flirty. But it could also just be anything. It just looks like a kind of fun dynamic to have. So I got excited when I saw that. That looks like a lot of fun on Tuesday. And moving right along to Wednesday, October 19th. We do have two aspects, and then before I get into those, Moon continues through Leo, and it's approaching that exact sextile to the Sun. So Wednesday is at least as harmonious as Tuesday. We still have that trine between Venus and Mars. Even the Sun and Mars are still pretty close to trining. So that's really great. We have, again, those kind of more pleasure-oriented themes going on. Moon in Leo is having us explore some more pleasure-oriented themes too. This stuff looks really good, honestly, because the energy is very much focused on Libra and then Leo with the Moon there, I would say right now. And both Libra and Leo are ruled by benefics. They're ruled by Venus and the Sun, respectively. So both of these planets kind of they kind of bestow upon us abundance and pleasure in ways where we don't necessarily have to work super hard for it. So this looks like a fun dynamic. And then with the Moon stepping into that sextile with the Sun, that looks like a really pleasant and fun dynamic as well. Like there's this sense of kind of camaraderie. Of course, not everyone is going to be on the same page. Like no one ever is. Depending on how this falls in your chart, this may not be a good day. But I think for everyone, generally speaking, this does look like some pretty cool stuff going on, especially when we combine it all. Okay, the two aspects I mentioned we have for Wednesday. One would be Mercury opposing Chiron. This is a little bit different. Chiron energy is awkward. I don't know if you remember the full moon from last weekend, but that was conjunct Chiron, so there may have been some kind of awkwardness there. I don't know if you can remember that and see if you can remember this feeling that I'm talking about, but there's just something awkward about Chiron aspects. I don't know how else to explain it, but if you remember that full moon and if you remember kind of weirdness going on last weekend, you'll know what I'm talking about. So expect a little bit of that on Wednesday, not nearly as much because it's just Mercury opposing Chiron. It's not like a full moon or anything. But Mercury opposing Chiron just means that Chiron's energy is channeled into Mercury, and Mercury represents our thoughts, our intellect, how we communicate, how we kind of approach things, it's also kind of like the daily rhythm of things. I think Mercury has a lot to do with like errands and things like that. Um, so all of that is gonna get this kind of awkward energy from Chiron in its best form. I think this could make us more empathetic, but also more kind of channeling like this demand to be understood. With Chiron and Aries, it's been there since 2018. I talk about this all the time in these forecasts. You know, Chiron and Aries, it's made us a little bit sensitive, a little bit triggered, a little bit easily offended since 2018. That's because we all are like slightly more demanding to be understood and to be heard and all that. So with Mercury and Libra making this opposition, it does bring all that up to the surface, which can be uncomfortable, can be awkward, but it can also potentially be great for gaining increased empathy and understanding, so that can be good. I think especially because Mercury is in Libra, and Sun and Venus are in Libra too. So this shows that right now, in this time of year, we are relatively more diplomatic and empathetic. So combining that energy with Chiron and Aries, which is much more self-centered, I think that can be good for maybe having some therapeutic conversations. Moving on, the other aspect we have for Wednesday is Sun squaring Pluto. Pluto's been at 26 degrees Capricorn forever. I feel like it's been months. And then now we have Sun stepping into 26 degrees Libra, squaring Pluto. And Venus, like I said, is traveling right behind the Sun. So you can definitely bet Venus is about to step into this square with Pluto as well. So what does that mean? So Pluto in Capricorn represents this like kind of darkness that's in our hierarchies, in the structure of our lives, both our individual lives as well as collectively. So on an individual level, it can be your family or your place of work. What is the structure that is in your life? What are the hierarchies of your life? And globally, it can be our economics and our governments, our rules and regulations, things like that. So with Pluto, there's been this kind of like darkness there. We've been figuring out a lot of dark truths in all of these areas since Pluto entered Capricorn back in 2008. I know it's been forever. Um, so anyway, now that the Sun is at 26 degrees Libra, squaring Pluto, there's some kind of crisis there, some kind of clash, some kind of power struggle going on. This could also be a time where we discover more kind of dark truths, or there's some kind of troublesome event. By troublesome, I mean with Pluto, I've noticed that Pluto really brings out like insecurities, any like fear or paranoia or anything that, if you wanted to just kind of sweep something under the rug and just be like, oh, this is kind of dark, I don't want to look at it, Pluto's going to bring that right out to the surface. And again, it's in Capricorn, so this is specifically about hierarchies and structure. So yeah, some kind of darkness coming out. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. Pluto destroys whatever is unjust or whatever's not working, whatever's not ethical. That destruction can still be traumatic just because you're destroying something bad or removing something bad. And again, by bad, I mean inefficient, evil, hurtful. Just because you're removing that it doesn't mean it's an easy time. That can be traumatic in itself. So it's definitely dark with Pluto. It's always dark. It's a destructive energy, but destruction can be a form of creation, like Donnie Darko. Destruction can make room for something better to come in. Excuse me. This is not a super big deal. It's definitely where the focus is, though, on Wednesday and Thursday as well, as Venus steps into this square too. This will be most strong for you, or most applicable for you, if you have major planets around 26 degrees of the cardinal sign. So that would be Libra and Capricorn especially, but also Aries and Cancer. All right, moving to Thursday, October 20th. Moon will leave Leo and enter Virgo. So it looks like it's actually early on Thursday that we get that exact sextile between the moon and the sun, and then only a few hours after that, moon leaves Leo and enters Virgo. So we still have, that harmonious energy kind of ruminating all day today from that exact sextile the moon makes to the sun. And I would tell you, this, I'll give you some homework. If you go out and if you see the moon today, right around the time that the moon makes this sextile, it doesn't have to be like that exact time, but any time today, if you see the moon, it literally looks beautiful, I think, when it's at this sort of phase. When it's making this aspect with the sun, it's a waning crescent, and I think it literally looks beautiful in the sky, and so it's very appropriate that it's a beautiful transit to experience. It's usually a pretty harmonious time. So that's pretty cool. And then, like I said, looks like right after noon Eastern Standard Time, moon does leave Leo and enter Virgo. I think this is one of the most dramatic changes between the signs. I'd probably rank it in the top three because I don't know, Virgo is just such a different sign. I think Leo is so carefree and so optimistic, and then when planets enter Virgo, it can be a little bit disheartening, I think, because Virgo has to be so kind of critical and analytical and aware of everything, even if it's not fun. So with Moon in Virgo, it's more of a time to be intellectual, especially because at this point we still have Sun, Venus, and Mercury all in Libra, and then now with Moon in Virgo, the themes that Libra and Virgo share are their intellect. These are both very intellectual signs. They're a little bit detached. They're very cerebral. They're wanting to learn. So that's very much where the focus is today. Especially because we have a lot of air planets in general, and all the air signs are intellectual. They're all detached and more logical in nature. They can be very illogical, but either way, they have this kind of mental focus, if you will. And right now, we really have a lack of fire and water planets, especially with Moon in Virgo now. We really just have Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Aries for water and fire planets. So what this air and earth focus means is pretty much what I said. Air and earth are the least emotional elements. They're both more detached, they're more mentally oriented, more intellectual. And with Moon in Virgo, this is a great time to prepare and to integrate too, because Moon is sort of at its final stages of its cycle before it will, approach the sun and be a new moon. And when it does, it's going to be a new moon solar eclipse, so that's going to be a big deal. But that's not for this week. That's next week. But right now, as the moon is going through Virgo, Virgo is always a sign about integration, preparation, organization, etc. And right now, because the moon is in its final stages of its cycle in Virgo, moon being in its final stages means typically integration. It's kind of a spiritual time. So what I'm trying to say is this is a great time for kind of integrating and preparing. I say, to do that, you really have to let your mind rest. So if you can do activities that are relaxing for you, and this can even be like boxing or something, it doesn't have to be, excuse me, it doesn't have to be physically calming, if that makes sense, as long as it lets your mind kind of drift and wander. And there's so many different ways we can do this as humans. It could be something, physically active like working out or running, or it could be like golf or something artistic. It could be a million different things. But whatever allows you to kind of get into the zone, so to speak, and just let your mind wander. This is basically meditation, but it doesn't have to be, you sitting with your legs crossed and your eyes closed. It could be writing, reading. I don't know. If you have some kind of time to make room for that sort of activity, I think that's pretty much always good to do. But especially with Moon at this position in its cycle in Virgo, great time for all that. Thursday we do have one aspect that would be Venus squaring Pluto. I kind of already talked about that, but so we already established that the Sun squared Pluto a day prior on Wednesday. So that was bringing up all this kind of darkness with our hierarchies. We're still experiencing that. Sun is still within orb of this square to Pluto. But now with Venus making this exact square to Pluto, Venus represents our desire, our pleasure, also represents abundance. Excuse me. So So this is kind of tricky. So our desire, our pleasure, our abundance. Right now, Venus is in Libra, so it's showing that much of what we desire is each other, our relationships. We want to strengthen our bonds and relationships and experience life with other people. How are we with different people? What sides of ourselves is brought out are brought out by other people. So that's where the pleasure and the desire is right now. But then now Pluto is kind of challenging all that, or bringing some kind of crisis or insecurity, fear. And I shouldn't say bringing it. Really, it's just exposing it because it's already been there. It's not like Pluto is actually starting this necessarily. It's just kind of stripping away some of the, if you had some kind of if you had some kind of buffer that allowed you to dissociate, excuse me, where you didn't want to look at these kind of darker things going on, Pluto is going to put a stop to that and shove it in your face pretty much and make you deal with it. So there may be some kind of darkness going on there. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving forward to Friday, October 21st, Moon continues on through Virgo here. We don't have any planetary aspects yet, but I just want to say at this point, look at the Sun and Venus and how close they are to the South Node. This is what I've been talking about since August, actually. Since, I don't know, halfway through the year, I saw this and I saw these eclipses that are going to be happening in late October and especially November. And this is what I was talking about, where I was saying, summer is going to be relatively calm, and then things are going to really get interesting in fall. This is what I was talking about pretty much, because before we had the planets very scattered. This makes things a little bit more mild, generally speaking. That's a huge generalization. But when the planets are so scattered, it means that whatever your chart is, pretty much, you're going to have some easy aspects, you're going to have some hard aspects. So, all in all, it makes things overall more mild and less extreme. It's when the planets cluster together that there's usually a huge new beginning and things become much more intense, whether that means it's a really great time for you or a really awful, challenging time where you're going through a lot and learning a lot. Things become much more intense when we get clusters of planets, especially near the nodes. And here you can see this dynamic that I've been talking about begin to, start forming. We've had Uranus close to the North Node most of the year, like pretty much all year almost. But now the Sun, Venus, and Mercury to a slightly lesser extent, these inner planets, if we can call the Sun a planet, I know that's not correct, but whatever. These kind of inner planets in astrology, these are all approaching the South Node. So that's what triggers the eclipse season. That's what will trigger this new moon solar eclipse once the moon catches up with the Sun. And that's where things are going to get very interesting. But anyway, that doesn't specifically apply to Thursday, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because you can see the planets start to line up around the nodal axis at this point. But as the moon continues through Virgo, we still have that very intellectual focus or dominance. A lot of air energy, a lot of earth energy. Air energy is much more cerebral and detached, more mentally focused, like I said. Earth energy can be too, especially with Virgo, but earth is more physical in nature. So Virgo wants to analyze everything physically, all the objects and the nature and, all the measurements. Virgo wants to measure everything. So really, I know I already said this for Thursday, but I think for Friday as well, this is a really perfect time to integrate. Moon in its final stages of its cycle in Virgo, this is a time of preparation. Not just preparation physically, like the kind of, classic Virgo archetypes of, planning, making lists, establishing a routine, taking stock of your inventory or your finances. All of that is kind of classic Virgo stuff. This is a great time for all of that. But also because the moon is in its, last part of its cycle, also integrating spiritually, mentally, emotionally as well. Really, this is part of Virgo as well. This is part of what Virgo is doing. When it's organizing its outer world, it's organizing its inner world as well. So that's something we can all do right now. Even if you don't have any Virgo planets, this may be maybe less familiar to you or less comfortable, but it's something we can all do. It's something we do all do on some level. So again, something where you can kind of relax your mind. Reading, writing, cooking, even cleaning can actually be spiritually enlightening. There's this weird overlap between Pisces and Virgo, which gets really interesting. Where if you're doing something methodical, like doing the dishes and just getting lost in the kind of repetition of it, yes, it can be boring, but it can also be hypnotic. I know that I sound totally crazy, but I know I'm not the only one who's experienced this. Your mind can kind of just wander and get lost. You can kind of daydream, and it can be important for integration. So that's what I'm talking about here. Integration is absolutely necessary for building our intuition, our psychic abilities, and I think all of this is very important at a time right, like now, right before what will be such an intense time. Because, and one last thing on this before I get to Saturday, but the reason why this is so important is because when we get to Sun and Venus and Scorpio and eclipse season, all this stuff that we'll be experiencing next week, when we get to that time, it's not going to be so much about integration and preparation. I always say that's going to be like the test time. Right now is the time we can study and prepare ourselves and become stronger. And when when things really get interesting at the end of this month going into November, in a way it's almost easier because the preparation time is over. It's time to just show up and give it everything you've got and just be who you are. So in a way, it's much more simpler, much simpler. So anyway, right now is the time to study because next week is the test. You can think about it that way. I don't know. Hopefully that helps. Saturday, October 22nd, Moon leaves Virgo and enters Libra. So it looks like very late in the day before midnight Eastern Standard Time, Moon will enter Libra. So we still have Moon in Virgo pretty much all day. Still all that good like preparation and integration stuff I talked about. That was affecting us Thursday and Friday. That continues for most of Saturday as well. But I do think it's interesting by the end of the day, Moon will be in Libra already. So that shows you that Moon is only one sign away from the Sun. It's approaching that new moon solar eclipse. So we're already feeling that kind of like calm before the storm type of energy. New moons are typically calm, but not always. New moons are interesting. I think they're a little bit unpredictable. They start things, and typically we don't see the full effect of what new moons start until about a week to 2 weeks later. But depending on how a new moon falls in your chart, it can trigger large events as well. Anyway, on Saturday we do have two aspects. Those would be Mercury trining Saturn and Sun conjunct Venus. Let's talk about Mercury trining. Well, no. Let's talk about Sun conjoining Venus first. This is the more intense aspect. For two reasons. One is because conjunctions, I would say, are the most intense aspect. Or the most symbolic, meaningful aspects, kind of, because they are beginnings. They're both endings as well as beginnings. Well, one chapter ending and one chapter beginning. So that's one reason why this aspect is notable for sure. But another reason is because it's very interesting when this happens, where Sun and Venus are conjunct at the last degree of Libra, and that's why they will enter Scorpio together on Sunday. So, it's really interesting when planets conjoin one another, either at the first or the last degree of a sign, because these degrees are very notable. They're very interesting. A lot of, interesting things happen at these degrees. At the last degree of a sign, that's where there's this kind of death in a way, or this ending. And it's sort of like, like in movies or, well, real life too, but when someone dies and their life like flashes before their eyes and it's almost like they go through their whole life again and go through all these memories. This is actually very common in many cycles as they end. There's like this flashback of, that whole previous cycle that is now ending. So that can happen as well when planets are at the last degree of a sign. So the way you may experience this, especially if you have strong Libra energy. But whatever happened over this last month or so when the Sun and Venus were in Libra, you maybe get kind of a flashback. So maybe something may happen today that is symbolic of what you've really experienced this whole past month. Maybe you thought you were done with a certain experience, with a relationship or with your job. You thought you were over it. You thought you were going to make a different decision and be done with it. But then now it comes up again on Saturday, and it's sort of like a test to see, are you actually done with it, or are you going to make the same decision again? And if you truly have moved on and you've changed, you've grown, then you will make a different decision in response to this situation than you did before. And then that's what allows you to move on and enter the new stage. The new stage is going to be Scorpio. So it's going to be more intense. But before we get there, we have this little test with Sun conjoining Venus at the end of Libra, just to see if we are ready to move on, kind of. And I think this will be fine. This will be pleasurable. Venus is benefic, like I said. Venus bestows upon us pleasure and desire. It's one of the easiest planets to deal with. And with Venus conjoining the Sun, this means that our whole day is kind of filled with that energy. So, maybe it is a test, but it's one that's focusing on pleasure and desire, specifically with social relationships. So, definitely not super tough stuff here, I wouldn't say. Especially because Venus isn't domicile in Libra. Venus is still very strong. Now that's about to change once Venus enters Scorpio. It's going to be a very different dynamic. But still, for this day, it'll be the last time, we still have this kind of light, easygoing Venusian and Libran energy going on. Libras can be so bubbly. And so, yeah, we kind of get this little burst of that energy right before everything changes on Sunday. Okay, that was a nice segue. So going to Sunday, October 23rd, we have a lot going on. This is actually by far the most eventful day of this week, of this forecast. Both Sun and Venus enter Scorpio together. Now it's so wild when this happens. So you can see here at noon Eastern Standard Time, they will both be at 0 degrees Scorpio together. So the dynamic shifts pretty dramatically. I think there's already dramatic shifts when the Sun enters new signs. But especially having an inner planet like Venus making this transition at pretty much the same exact time, it's going to make that transition even more dramatic, more intense, more sudden. So happy birthday, Scorpios. This is your time to shine, like I mentioned before. And for everyone else, I know I already said it, but I'm going to say it again. Where does Scorpio fall in your chart? That's going to tell you how this will affect you. That's where there's going to be all the energy and the focus and the change over the next month. Okay, and Sun and Venus in Scorpio, very, very different dynamic. Like I just said, Libra is such a light and kind of bubbly energy. It's so curious and just wanting to bounce ideas off of other people. And, it has this detachedness that allows it to kind of experiment and be a little bit playful. This is so different in Scorpio. Scorpio is not light and detached at all. I think Scorpio can seem that way, but it's very deceptive. Scorpio, we're all a little bit more, it's such a deep energy. And I think in the northern latitudes, we can experience this with these kind of plunging temperatures. Everyone, there's this like electricity in the air. We can feel more connected, more alive, kind of. And there's this feeling of like impending doom almost as fall comes in. Fall is like this huge death, and Scorpio has much to do with death. What is death but just a huge change, a huge transformation? That's what Scorpio is all about, is transformation. This is a kind of much more darker energy, I would say. But just like fall is literally a darker time and a colder time, it also brings us together, I think. We deal with a lot of themes involving like romance in Libra and Scorpio. Libra is more of this like courtship phase, and Scorpio becomes much more intense and much more physical in nature. So it's interesting how it's almost like this sense of impending doom brings us together, I think. Anyways, Venus is in detriment in Scorpio too, so that's again very different from, Venus was in Libra where she was in domicile, very strong, bringing us that pleasure and abundance. Now Venus is in Scorpio, so it doesn't have that capacity to do that. The pleasure and abundance we will receive will be it'll be very unusual. It will be in unexpected places. It may be harder to find. All of this is typical with planets in detriment, like Venus in Scorpio. The Sun is not in detriment in Scorpio, but I don't know. I think Scorpio as a sign almost seems like detriment type of energy because literally, I think detriment means kind of like rot or decay. And with Scorpio, the world is kind of rotting or decaying. It can be very beautiful, but you know, Libra is the first part of fall where we get those beautiful colors in the north. Scorpio is a little bit more barren, and I think that's why people born with a lot of Scorpio energy are so resilient and so passionate. I think they have to be. They're coming into the world at such a harsh and cold time when the rest of the world is decaying, and ending. That's when they're starting their journey, kind of. So you can learn a lot about Scorpio from people with Scorpio placements, of course. But anyway, Sun and Venus and Scorpio, intensity, emotion, lots of deep emotion. This is so different from Libra too. I regard Libra as the most detached sign. So switching from Libra to Scorpio, Scorpio is the most emotionally intense sign. So very, very different. And like I said, this will continue for the next month. This is also intense because now Sun is only 13 degrees away from the South Node. And I was looking up online before this, seeing, how close to the nodes does the Sun have to be considered eclipse season? And I got different answers ranging from 11 to 18 degrees away. But in any case, the Sun is 13 degrees away. So at this point, I would say it's safe to say it's eclipse season now. This will really start once the moon approaches the sun, and moon is very close. Moon is less than a sign away. Moon is still in Libra. So we're very close to getting that intense new moon solar eclipse where something really big is going to be beginning. And it's not just one thing. This will look different for all of us. Each and every one of us will have something begin in our lives, and collectively there's going to be many new events happening as well. And this is this is just the beginning too. We have another eclipse after this one that's going to be even more intense too. But anyway, as of right now for Sunday, Sun in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, near the South Node. So definitely this kind of ominous feeling starting on Sunday. This can be exciting for a lot of us. I think some of us feel activated with energies like this. We feel kind of like turned on, so to speak. Others may not like this. If you have more planets in like Aries and Taurus, or even like Leo, this kind of energy may be uncomfortable because it's very different. Um, but Moon is in Libra. I think Moon in Libra is so close to the Sun. Um, it's barely visible, if at all, at this point. The Moon is. And so, because the moon is so close to the sun and it's in Libra, this is very much a dreamy kind of time. So, I don't know, things are dreamy, mystical, emotional, spiritual. Uh, this could be a time of enlightenment, but also confusion. I don't think everything is going to completely make sense, though, because it typically doesn't right before a huge change. Or, I should say, if things do make a lot of sense, prepare for that to change dramatically because everything's going to change basically. Okay, one other thing on Sunday, Saturn turns direct at 18 degrees Aquarius. This is kind of a big deal. So, we had this huge phase for months this year where we had many planets retrograde. Now, one by one, they've all kind of popped and gone direct. Not all of them. Jupiter's still retrograde, Neptune's still retrograde. But at this point, we've got, Pluto and Saturn. I guess Uranus is retrograde too. Anyway, with Saturn turning direct, though, Saturn represents the structure of our lives. So Saturn is like the father figure. It's not just the father figure, it also represents, the government, for example. The government's supposed to be the big daddy, so to speak. So with Saturn turning direct, there's going to be more structure, if that makes sense. I think, when Saturn went retrograde much earlier this year, I talked about how I almost feel like it's a good thing Saturn going retrograde, because with planets, when planets are retrograde, they're more sleepy, they're more like non-physical in nature, more subconscious. Their energy isn't manifested as clearly. We don't really experience its energy the same way. So with Saturn retrograde, for example, it was, we were lacking that structure. And Saturn is such a challenging energy. So I think for the last several months with Saturn retrograde, it was almost kind of a break from that heaviness, that structure, that discipline. Now, as Saturn is turning direct, we resume into that discipline and the structure. So I think this may be a time where world governments get a little bit of a grasp on things. I know they've been kind of grasping for control this year. They may find a little bit of control now, especially online, and through technologies, through the internet. All of these things are kind of typically, Aquarian topics or themes. But this control will be short lived. Saturn is turning direct. It's going to enter Pisces early next year. And when it does, there's going to be a complete collapse of that structure, of that control. But for now, there will be that short lived kind of regaining a little bit of control, of all the structures. Not just the governments, but you know, I don't know. We all have some kind of structure or someone holding us accountable, some kind of, our place of work or whatever it is, whatever is providing that structure for you. Um, in its worst case, it can be controlling and authoritarian, and in its best case, it can just be, structuring and providing a foundation. But we all have something that fits that theme here. So whatever that is for you, there's going to be more structure in that going forward, generally speaking. And again, just like with everything, you can, if you want to know more specifics, look to where Saturn is in your chart. That's where Saturn has been pushing you to get more responsibility, to get more serious with things. Um, for me, I was born with Saturn in Aquarius, so I'm getting more serious with everything. Getting more responsible, I mean. Anyway, that's pretty much what I have for you for this week. Very interesting times. It's going to get more interesting too. This is really just the beginning. This whole intense phase that we're about to enter is just the beginning because, like I touched on before, early next year we're going to have Saturn move into Pisces, we're going to have Pluto move into Aquarius, and what else? We're also going to have Jupiter in Pisces for a little bit very soon. So with these changes, there's gonna be a lot going on. I want to make some videos on these outer planets shifting because it's gonna be a very interesting dynamic next year. There's gonna be a collapse of the structure, of everything. This could be a collapse of the economy or of governments. I don't know how extreme this collapse will be, but I do know there's gonna be some kind of removal of all this structure. With Saturn transiting Capricorn and Aquarius for the last few years, really the last several years since December 2019, I believe, we've had a lot more structure. Pretty much since COVID, there's been a lot of structure, a lot of rules and regulations. We've had that kind of overdose of Saturnian energy in Capricorn and Aquarius where it's in domicile. That changes so dramatically when Saturn enters Pisces. Pisces, there is no structure. Everything's kind of loosey goosey. Pisces is the end. It's the collapse of everything. Pisces, there are no rules. So this is going to be very different. I don't want to glorify or demonize it, but it's going to be the start of a huge transition. And once we enter the mid 2020s, that's where things get really wild because by 2025, 2026, all the outer planets are going to start lining up in the more action oriented signs, fire and air signs. And then one quick thing about Pluto in Aquarius too, that'll be interesting. There's Our technologies will become less reliable. Well, at least that's one timeline that I think is likely. I think we're already seeing glimpses of this in certain locations, some more than others. But yeah, starting next year, Pluto will be in Aquarius, so we will see destruction of technologies that were not in our best interest, or a lot of the maybe more negative effects of technologies will be revealed even more than they already have been. And like I said, those technologies will become less reliable. These technologies that were used for communication um, may become less reliable in a lot of areas, and there may be destruction of maybe online services or technological services that were not truly in our best interest, that were corrupt somehow. So I know this is heavy stuff, but if you're here, you're listening to me, I know that this is what you want. You want to know what's happening. You want to improve. I think that's something I hear from all you guys. So I lay it on thick because I think if you're listening to this, I think you can handle it, and I think that's what you're wanting. And I really don't see any of this as negative. It can be exciting. It can be challenging. I don't see it as good or bad, though. Really, I think this is a time where things are going to become much more interesting. So anyway, I hope this information helps you, and you'll hear from me next week. Take care.